So, hi Hilda. Here we are again. Welcome back to another episode of Blood Matters, a podcast for nurses. How are you doing today?
I'm very good, thank you. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm great. Thanks very much. Yeah, we've got a really exciting lineup planned for today's pod. So today the topic is survivorship, big topic, and we have a couple of really fantastic guests today, don't we? Do you want to tell the listeners a little bit about them?
Yeah, we have today two fantastic guests. One is a former patient from the Netherlands. His name is Pepijn van Leeuwen, and he's a survivor of acute myeloid leukemia. And after he received his transplant, he had an aggressive graft versus host disease, and it led him to an hospitalization of about 1.5 years. And he lost most of his small intestines during that period. And following a long recovery process filled with many ups and downs, he is now able to live like a relatively normal life. So that's very nice to hear. He's currently pursuing his master's degrees in finance and strategic management at the Erasmus University in Rotterdam. That's really great. And he would love to join us today.
Really very excited to hear from him. I think
Yeah.
this might be the first time that we've had a patient join us as a guest on the pod. So it's really exciting,
It's really exciting.
to kind of really hear from those people that really matter. Yeah, I think his story is really going to kind of resonate with a lot of people who are listening in. And who else have we got, Hilda?
We also have Hélène Schoemans. She's a full staff member of the hematology department and bone marrow transplant unit at the Gasthuisberg campus of the University Hospital of Leuven. It sounds a little bit Dutch, I assume, because we both in Belgium and in the Netherlands speak Dutch. She's also an assistant professor, Hélène, at the Faculty of Medicine at the Catholic University of Leuven since 2020, where she teaches the basics of clinical exam, patient-reported outcomes, and leadership. Great items, I think. She completed her training as a medical doctor in 2001 at the University Catholique at Leuven and became a board-certified hematologist in 2009. She defended her PhD thesis titled Rethinking Care After Cure in Allogeneic Stem Cell Transplant Using eHealth and Patient-Reported Outcomes in 2019, also in Leuven. She also gathered expertise through international internships in Canada and in the US, and also another internship in the US in 2015. Well, wonderful. Her research and clinical interest includes graft versus host disease, e-health, survivorship issues, quality of life, and patient participation in research. I think two very well matching guests today, Michelle.
Yeah, very exciting. And, for those people who may have heard Hélène speak before, her passion for patient care and patient advocacy is so strong. And, she kind of really gets what survivor care is really all about. And I'm very excited that she's going to be joining us today to share her insights and her experiences with us all. Thank you very much, Hilda. And I think we're going to move on and welcome our guests in a moment. So Hélène, it's wonderful to be able to welcome you to the podcast today. And we have such an exciting topic to talk about and a couple of really incredible guests. So we're extremely excited about this episode. Hélène, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Definitely, Michelle. So my name is Hélène Schoemans. I'm an adult transplant physician from Belgium. I work in Leuven. I consider myself to be currently healthy. I am cisgender, heterosexual, quite well educated and middle class. I'm Caucasian and I'm from European descent. I'm also a wife and a mother of 2 boys. And then that's for my background and my potential biases. And then on the other hand, what I'm really passionate about in the professional sphere is transplantation and all the complications that come along transplantation, GVHD, survivorship issues, and more specifically, patient-centeredness. what I want to do in my professional work is really to understand how to help patients have a more meaningful life despite having a hematological disease or a transplant. And how I do this in my everyday life is I work on the transplant ward, and I have a survivorship and GVHD clinic together with a advanced practice nurse. I do some research on how we can use e-health to bridge the gap with home, and I work with an EBMT and the CIBMTR in the survivorship committees where I promote patient participation.
Well, thanks so much, Hélène. I mean, you're a massive advocate for all of the topics that you cover and more, really. But you know, it's really incredible the work that you're doing to raise the profile of such an important topic. I'm going to hand over to Hilda now.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. I have a next question for you, Hélène. Survivorship is a widely accepted concept used in many different areas and specialties, and there are a range of definitions and interpretations. Is there a particular definition or group of words that captures this for you?
Thank you. It's an excellent question. You know, to me, definitions are there to be used, and there is a definition of cancer survivorship that dates back to 20 years ago. It was actually put up by the Institute of Medicine, and they defined a cancer survivor patient as being a patient who has received a diagnosis of cancer. And for some people, survivorship begins the day they get their diagnosis. But then you have other people who think it should begin from the time they're done with treatment. And some people would say that it really starts when they're 5 years down the line. Not everyone agrees, but maybe the best definition of a cancer survivor is really to start from diagnosis and also to include the family members and the people who are giving care to that patient in an informal way. If you think about survivorship research, the way that the Institute of Medicine defines that is really encompassing everything that has to do with physical, psychosocial, and economic sequelae of a cancer diagnosis and its treatment. And it also includes healthcare delivery, access to care, and follow-up care. So when you think about survivorship research, it's really about preventing and controlling anything that has to do with the cancer diagnosis and its treatment. And that could be late effects, but that could also be second cancers or the lower quality of life. It promotes optimal follow-up care, and in that way hopes to improve health after cancer treatment. So it is a mouthful.
You can say that, and it is really a holistic approach, and I listen well to you.
Absolutely, and that's what I believe in, and that's also what is being advocated by most cancer survivorship societies, I think, in the past 20 years.
Luckily, thank you so much. I hand back to Michelle.
Thanks, Hilda. And Hélène, gosh, that really is kind of all-encompassing. So how do you then reduce that down to describe survivorship to your patients in a way that feels relatable and meaningful for them?
Thanks, because I agree, right? I mean, this is like our overarching goal. It's like the horizon, but how do we make it happen in daily life? The way I do this with my patients is I speak about survivorship from the moment I talk to them about transplant, because usually I only meet them at transplants. I don't necessarily meet them at diagnosis. And so I tell them upfront what we're going to follow up on for the rest of their lives. And once they come into the survivorship clinic, and that's usually after 6 months to 1 year after transplantation, that they transition to the survivorship ambulatory setting, there, every time I see them, I do it in the same way. I see them clinically, so I do a medical exam, I do a blood test, and I go over the results with them. So I tell them about their graft function. Usually in 99% of cases, I can tell them that their graft is working fine, and I reassure them that there's no relapse. Then we look at complications. So I tell them about how I evaluate their GVHD and the severity and whether we need to do something about it. We look at late effects together and how this relates to their medication. Then I have a general question about psychosocial issues, but by the time I get to the psychosocial issues, I'm already 20 minutes into my 30-minute talk. And that's the point where I try to pick up whether they need referral. And then we make next steps together. We make a new appointment. We make sure that they know when they come back, if they want to come back. Now, I will also disclose that I'm very, very lucky that I have extra funding to do this in parallel with an advanced practice nurse. And so some of you know her, it's Kathy Goris. We work in tandem. And so what Kathy does is she sees the patients half an hour before me to kind of, find out if there are any major psychosocial issues. She takes care of the referrals after the clinical contact with me, and that makes us work very holistically, but I realize that it's a luxury position and this is not covered by our insurance. It's really on private funding.
Thanks, Helen. That's great. Thank you. I'm going to hand back to Hilda.
Thank you. And lovely to hear that you had such a nice tandem work, Hélène, with Kathy. Another question is, why is or should survivorship be important to health professionals?
Let me give you a threefold answer, right? Okay, the most evident answer is probably it should be important to us because it's important to patients, and we know that it's important to patients. Just everything in the literature that has to do with patient expectations after transplant has to do with survivorship. If you think about any patient asking you about a transplant, they want to know how they're going to do it long term. So I think the first level is really evident. We want patients to be helped in functioning and in avoiding disability, and if they do have disability, to make sure they function as well as possible with their disabilities, whether they have to do with transplant or not. That's at the micro level. But I would like to challenge people who think that survivorship is like some form of advanced primary care, because I believe it could also have an impact at the meso level. And there's a very interesting paper by Michelle, which was published in 2020, where they looked at 100 centers in America and they looked at outcome, and they could show that higher transplant volumes and the presence of a survivorship clinic in a center translated in better survival long term. So there is a little bit of evidence, that's one paper, but it's better than nothing at the meso level. And I will disclose that I have no papers to share for the macro level, but I'm really hoping that what we're doing makes a difference, that our patients create less healthcare costs because they develop less chronic diseases after transplant because of our survivorship care, and that they go back to work and their social roles. I hope so, I don't know. And that's really an area for research in the future. I think we need to show that our survivorship clinics make a difference at the society's level. But at this stage, I have no references to share at that level.
Thank you. That's very clear. And for the listeners, we will put the links below our podcast if possible, or otherwise you can read it somewhere else. I'll hand back to Michelle for the last question for Hélène. Thank you, Hélène.
Thank you, Hilda. And I think then that really nicely segues into our final question to you for now, Hélène. So if you had to choose one paper that describes survivorship care as you identify with it, with all of your experiences and interactions with patients, which paper would that be and why?
Aha, the million-dollar question, and also my chance to make some advertisement about a paper that just came out, as you know, in April and in June. So it came out in April in TCT, it came out in June in bone marrow transplantation. And with a large group, what we did was to update the Survivorship Bible from Michelle and colleagues, which most of you know from 2012. So we felt like 10 years down the line, it was high time to update this, and we did. The way that this paper is built up is that we put a number of experts together from 11 different transplant societies, just the same type of very international effort like the one that was done 10 years ago. And based on input from these experts, we tried to look at survivorship recommendations and grade them in function of the evidence. And so if you go to that paper from Roth, from Seth Ross and Rachel Phelan. You can find it on PubMed very easily. If you just type Survivorship 2024, you'll get them right away. In transplant, of course, in HSCT. It will also be in the notes. And what you find in that paper is a description of how to screen and how to manage all major medical complications. You also have a full chapter about psychosocial health, quality of life, cognitive problems, secondary malignancies. I invite you to look at the survivorship guidelines annex because you have a lot of meaningful information out there. You have vaccination recommendations, which are not in the full text, but you can look up in the supplementary material. You have a very interesting supplementary document, which gives you patient peer support groups to help patients through survivorship. And you will find also some of those links in the notes from this podcast. And you have some extra information about different populations. For example, specific information about survivorship in IAS, or specific information about bone marrow failure syndrome, because we know that there's a lot of other things you have to follow up on, not just transplant. So those are just two examples of what you would find in the supplementary data. You really need to look that up. And then finally, you guys know that I'm very passionately trying to advocate for patient self-management. So we also made a one-page summary on the CIBMTR website where patients can look up in a very succinct summary the basic messages from this paper, and also get access to the full link. So I think that's also something you can share with your patients.
Thanks, Helen. I think one of the things that's really striking when you look at the new guidelines compared to the 2012 Michelle guidelines, which have been brilliant and really have been cornerstone of survivor care in a transplant speciality for, you know, that decade and beyond, while we've been waiting for the new guidelines to be published. But when you compare like for like, it's actually incredibly encouraging to see how much survivor care or survivorship care has transformed and moved forward over that time. That this paper now is so much more encompassing of the sorts of things that feel important for not just clinicians, but also for patients. And that's a real difference. And you know, I feel really happy that things are moving forward to such an extent. So those guidelines have been for sure worth waiting for, and all of those other supplements and bits of information that we all find really useful and should be part of our education and the air that we breathe when we're looking after survivors after transplant. So thank you very much, Helen, for being part of that group and the input that you've had, but also for drawing everybody's attention to those, because they are, you know, the new cornerstone for survivor and late effects care. Thanks so much, Helen. I think we're
Michelle. I just need to add one thing, because I mean, it's great to hear that you know, this is answering a need in our group and in our field. And at the same time, I also have to share that we were a little bit disappointed when we wrote the guidelines that the level of evidence for the majority of what we're recommending remains low. It's grade 2A, 2B. So this is also a call to the field for more studies in survivorship and better, more robust, methodologically sound studies, so that we can make better recommendations 10 years from now.
Yeah, that's definitely something to look forward to, Helen. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm now going to hand over to Hilda.
Thank you, Michelle. And I'm happy to bring in today also Pepijn van Leeuwen, one of our guests. And yeah, maybe I can ask you yourself to tell a little bit about yourself and about your experience.
Yeah, thank you, Hilda. I'm very grateful to be a part of this podcast. So I'm Pepijn van Leeuwen, and I'm 25 years old. I'm living in Rotterdam, the Netherlands. And when I was 16 years old, I was diagnosed with leukemia. And initially, I underwent chemotherapy in Rotterdam, where the Children's Hospital at that time was specialized in leukemia. But a particularly aggressive mutation led to the decision for me to undergo a stem cell transplantation in Leiden. Unfortunately, this procedure did not go as smoothly as hoped, and I developed quite a severe form of graft versus host disease about 6 weeks after the transplant. This condition caused significant damage to my small intestines, which was incredibly painful. And eventually, a large portion of my small intestines had to be removed. And I spent over a year in the hospital, with my last surgery happening around my 18th birthday. And after being discharged, I faced a long recovery period during which I was dependent on total parenteral nutrition for, I think, over a year. And today I have about 140 centimeters of my small intestines left, which is just enough for my body to absorb the necessary nutrients. And thanks to this, I can now lead a relatively normal life. And I'm currently pursuing a double master's degree in finance and strategic management in Rotterdam.
Well, that deserves a real applause that you are doing so great after this heavy period, I have to say. And I'm proud of you that you're doing 2 masters right now. That's really great. It's an impressive story. Thank you, Pepijn. And I hand back to Michelle for the next question.
Thanks so much, Hilda, and thanks so much for Pepijn. I mean, goodness me, you really are, quite incredible. I'm really full of admiration for you, and indeed for many of our patients who go through such a lot of adversity to reach a point where they can start to grow their lives once again. So I guess a question I really want to ask of you is what defines survivorship for you? We heard from Hélène, and from a professional perspective and from a healthcare perspective, which I know for Hélène is certainly broader than many. What defines survivorship for you, Pepijn?
I think for me, survivorship is indeed quite a wide concept. But I generally divide it into the 3 periods after I leave the hospital. So initially, my focus was on regaining my physical fitness to become mainly less dependent on others. And although this was physically challenging, this period, it was also quite enjoyable because, well, for the first time in a very long while, I experienced more freedom, a more active social life, and also daily improvements in my strength. And after a few months, this gradually transitioned into a more mentally demanding period where I had to discover which activities I could do quite comfortably and which I couldn't. For example, at that time, attending a small party on a Friday evening would leave me in bed for the rest of the weekend to recover. And over time, I learned to distinguish which activities were worth doing and pursuing and which were not. And that was a process that required quite a bit of adaptability. But today I can also see the advantages of surviving life-changing events like leukemia. I think it has led to substantial personal growth, giving me more resilience and mental strength and also adaptability. And I think it has taught me very well about the roles of certain individuals in my life, resulting now in having a circle of high-quality relationships. So to answer the question, I think survivorship for me means becoming independent again and having personal growth that balances with limitations from, well, being a survivor.
Thank you so much. Something that you say there just sort of slightly strikes me and makes me want to ask another question, which I'm going to do. And do you think it was your experience of graft versus host disease and then your subsequent recovery that has sort of leveraged that personal growth phase that you're experiencing now? Or if you had a crystal ball, or the kind of we call it a retroscope, I think, where you're able to look back in time and then look forward again. If you hadn't had those things, do you think you might still have experienced to a certain extent that that growth that you feel now, or do you think that they were kind of, the experience was a lead on to what you're experiencing?
Well, I don't have a crystal ball, but I do think that my experiences have helped me in having a lot of personal growth. And I mainly say this because at the time, well, before I had leukemia, I was like quite outgoing. I like to go to parties and stuff, and I didn't care too much for school. Well, now after my my illness, I really like took a completely different angle in that part, which has led me to well, now having well, now pursuing the double masters, for example, which I certainly would not have been doing if it weren't for the leukemia.
Remarkable. And that recovery is such an individual thing, isn't it? And the goals and development process is again very, very individualized to you and your situation and the network around you. I'm going to hand over to Hilda now for the next question.
Thank you, Michelle, and wonderful to hear from you, Pepijn, regarding that whole process with all those ups and downs. And another question is, can you talk a little about what excellence in this healthcare area of survivorship looks like for you?
Yes, of course. For me, excellence in survivorship has two facets, and that is during the treatment and after the treatment. And for me, the support of survivors starts at the time of diagnosis. And I believe that during the treatment setting and working towards certain goals by a patient is crucial to later have a successful reintegration. And these goals can be small for during treatment. For example, I always had the goal to go out of the hospital for at least a few hours a day. And these goals can also be bigger to eventually help with the reintegration to the normal society after a treatment. And setting this goal can be quite difficult because patients face a lot of uncertainty and often have setbacks, which makes it hard to stay motivated. And in my experience, the nurses and support staff really play a key role in helping to identify achievable goals and also to prevent frustration from setting well, goals that are just a little bit too high. Mm-hmm. For me, the hospital, school, and nurses greatly helped me with one specific goal, and that was to graduate from high school despite my diagnosis. So the hospital teacher from the LEMC came to my room daily, and the nurses also ensured that we weren't disturbed during the lessons. And their support eventually enabled me to graduate with really good grades, and therefore allowed me to continue the study on the same school. And without these good grades, my only option would have been to go to another school further away. Which would have been unmanageable at the time because the travel and increased study pressure would not have been possible for me to handle. And I think that after the treatment, survivorship continues with a more supporting role for the hospital. For me, excellence in this facet means having one primary doctor who coordinates with other specialists. And in my case, this is handled very well. For example, right after I left the hospital, I was connected with a very experienced personal trainer, which allowed me to regain my independence because I was able to walk and cycle for a greater distance within a few months. And that was quite liberating for me as I was 18 years old at the time. So it was really nice to be able to visit a friend myself, for example, instead of having to be brought by my mother or father. I see my doctor generally twice a year for a general checkup. And I also know who to contact for any physical complaints. And she then ensures that any necessary referrals are done to the right specialists. And she also communicates my medical history with them. And after examination, my regular doctor discusses the results. And this means that the specialist who I visit is already informed about my situation when I come there, which means that I don't have to repeat my entire medical history every time I visit another specialist, which is quite annoying to do every time you visit somebody. And also, if the specialist already knows about my history, it also makes sure that he or she doesn't have the same thought lines that have already been proposed at at an earlier stage of my treatment.
Thank you so much, Pepijn, and nice to see how you divide this excellence of care in two parts, like from diagnosis and after your hospitalization. And I remembered well your lessons regarding the goals we have to strive for with our patients. And I still teach everyone each day this important lesson I learned from you. So for the next question, I hand over to Michelle.
Thanks so much, Hilda. Yeah, it was really interesting what you said, Pepijn, about kind of how it becomes exhausting to keep retelling your story for your healthcare team. And actually, if that level of communication, that area of communication can be improved by having kind of like almost like a hub and a spoke that helps to kind of narrate your journey for you from a healthcare perspective, then that can be really powerful and is very important. So I have a question that's not about excellence, but maybe any suggestions for areas of survivor care or survivorship that could be improved, maybe using your own experiences.
Yeah, so in general, I'm very happy with how the healthcare system works in my case. So my life looks a bit different than most of my peers, and it's sometimes frustrating to not have the energy to join them with an activity. But all in all, I don't perceive being a survivor as a negative thing. Still, there are a few ideas that I would like to share. At first, I think that the coordination of care between specialists can still be handled better. In my case, it goes quite well. But it is mainly due to the tireless work of my treating doctor and her assistant. And I think that establishing more efficient standards to ensure a more seamless transition between different specialists would make the overall experience better. And a second thing that I would really like to see is maybe some kind of a training program for survivors that would better prepare them and help them understand the challenges that they may face of being a survivor. And these programs, they could cover topics such as recognizing warning signs, staying informed on new research, but also on things like managing finances, for example, navigation through the forest of insurance companies, and maybe some general help with physical training, nutrition. And I think these training programs might encompass aspects of survivorship that extend beyond what is typically covered in a general healthcare program. And addressing them would really benefit survivors. I think.
Thanks very much, Pepijn. I think some of those kinds of courses or programs exist in some countries, and are certainly quite popular among survivors of other cancers. I think we sometimes use them a little less within our transplant recipients, and maybe that's in part, I'm not sure, maybe that's in part because sometimes it's a little unclear as to when people might benefit the most from that sort of a program. But for sure, I agree with you. There's really a place for this sort of learning for patients. Even if you kind of just learn a couple of things about each of the areas that you talk about, and also that experience of validating that this is quite a normal thing to have a difficulty with after receiving treatment in your kind of recovery journey. Yeah, for sure. Thank you very much. I'm now going to hand back to Hilda to start the quickfire round, and we're going to bring you both in now, and we'll ask here a short question, ask for a fairly short answer, and kind of switch between the two of you for those responses. Thank you. Thanks, Hilda.
Yeah, I would love to start with Hélène, and my first question is, what is the greatest advance in survivorship and why?
The greatest advance. Well, I think the greatest advance is that it exists. And because 20 years ago, there was no survivorship research. So to me, the fact that it has, flourished over the past 20 years is an advance in itself. And obviously I'm biased, but I think the most recent advance, and I would say in the past 5 to 10 years, is the growing patient engagement in this field and the fact that we're listening to what the real struggles of the patients are. And to me, that is the way that we can really make a difference now as compared to our academic knowledge, but really listening to how our patients dealing with their daily lives after cancer, because we don't know. And I find everything that Pepijn has said today, again, eye-opening. Every time I listen to patients who take the time to explain their journey, I learn. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Hélène. And the same question for you, Pepijn.
Well, for me, the greatest advantage in survivorship is surviving. Without my stem cell transplantation and without my treatment, I would not be here. So I think that's fairly simple answer from my place. I'm generally happy. I'm generally quite healthy. So yeah, for me, it's really great to be a survivor.
Thank you so much for this wonderful answer. Hand back to Michelle for the second question in a quick fire round.
Thanks, Hilda. And again, for yourself, Hélène, what is your one take-home message for health professionals who are listening to this podcast?
I think that we as healthcare professionals really need to realize that our long-term survivors spend the majority of their time far from us, far from the tertiary center. They need to be empowered to take the right decisions regarding their health, and they need to know what to ask from the healthcare providers, because it's great if they have like a point of contact who's going to shepherd them through there. And some patients have this, and I'm hearing, Pepijn, that you have found a doctor who wants to do that for you. Many patients will not have that, and then they need to advocate for themselves and to teach their healthcare providers what they're at risk for. So yeah, I think my take-home message to healthcare professionals is realize that it's not all happening in transplant centers. It's out there in primary care and with subspecialisms.
Thanks, Hélène. That's a great answer. And the same question to you, Pepijn.
So for me, this is very helpful to have a central place of contact with my treating doctor, and that she has a very broad access to all other specialists in the hospital. because as a survivor, I want to spend the least possible time in the hospital, and a well-coordinated process really helps with this. For a simple example, is that it is very helpful for me when all appointments that have to be done are on the same day and there's no additional travel time. Well, because my energy level is generally lower, going to the hospital is quite demanding, and therefore also interferes with my general life. So having to go to the hospital multiple times for short appointments has a much larger negative effect than going there once, even if that means going to the hospital for a whole day. So I think the core of what I'm trying to say is that I would like it if there's like a good balance between getting the right care and the daily pressure of being a survivor.
Thank you very much, Pepijn. So good care coordination, both within the transplant centre and enabling people to access good levels of care outside of the transplant centre as well is what I'm getting from that. Hilda, over to you for the next question.
Thanks, Michelle. We start with Hélène. What piece of information you know now would you want your team to incorporate into survivorship care?
What we know now is that we have guidelines, and those guidelines have been updated, but they've been updated in a very general fashion. And what I want to know now is how are we going to implement this in our local settings, not all by ourselves as transplant physicians, but with nurses who are seeing the patients much more than we are, with all the subspecialists, and how are we going to help patients to use this in their daily lives? So I'm praying that this is going to happen in the coming 2 years, and that in 2 years we'll have another podcast saying about how successful the implementation of these guidelines has been.
Yeah, that would be great to have another podcast and to use and to see how it works. I hope it will be very successful, but with leaders in the field as you, I'm very hopeful. Pepijn, the same question for you.
For me, it is very helpful to have a dedicated care coordinator. And I think would be really helpful if the system of filing records is integrated such that a new specialist can read in on the patient more effectively and quickly. Because if I see that if the story is too long, that a specialist doesn't read the complete story, and then I have to tell my medical history completely again over and over again. So if there is some possibility that it is easier and quicker to read in on a patient, that would be really great. So to achieve this, I think that all professionals should at least follow the same procedures when recording information, but that's probably already the case. Yeah, and I also think that hospitals play a crucial role in setting up like collaborations with external organizations. For example, for the training program that I was referring to earlier. And maybe the hospital can in the end be like a central location to provide it. And also, I think it's really valuable for survivors to have an opportunity to connect with each other, because they often face quite similar challenges. And I think a certain program might be a good opportunity for that.
Yeah, wonderful answer, and especially the regarding the files, that's challenging, but also a very important point, especially when you find out yourself having such a long history, then it's important that you don't have to tell it again and again, and continuity is really important. Thanks for that. Last question for Michelle. Thanks
so much, Hilda. Hélène, one phrase to summarize.
I think my phrase would be, it takes two to tango, because on the one hand, you have the healthcare provider team with loads of people, different expertise. On the other hand, you have the patient and his informal team. And if we're going to make a difference, and if we want to make people have meaningful lives after transplantation, we have to talk to each other and do it together.
That's brilliant, Hélène. Thank you. And Pepijn.
I think a great sentence would be, well, lucky to be alive, but also very happy with my the help that I received from a hospital, and I hope that this is something that that is or becomes available to every survivor out there at some point in time.
Thank you very much. Gosh, I mean, it's hard to comment on both of your phrases. I need to digest and really think about what those mean, but they really resonate for sure, not just with ourselves, but also I'm sure the people that are listening to the pod, and hope people will kind of take away, you know, a lot of learning from the things that we've discussed during the podcast today, because, you know, the sorts of stuff and the insights that you've both shared, you know, can really be practice changing, you know, and change the experience for patients, but also change the experience of survivor care for health professionals as well. So a huge thank you to you both for so generously giving up your time and giving of your experience and sharing your insights with us today. Hilda, final word to yourself.
Yeah, I can echo your words, I think, because it's amazing what you've learned us, both of you learned us today. And I think all the listeners will agree with that. And we can listen several times and take every time a new lesson from it. And I think we should do that. So a message thanks for both of you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Gosh, that was an amazing episode and just fantastic to be able to welcome Hélène and Pepijn on the podcast together. You know, I think some take homes. You know, guidelines are really important and can be a really useful tool in being able to provide some structure to survivor care, and in particular the new guidelines that were published in 2024 have a number of different annexes and additional pieces of information there that can be helpful both for health professionals and also for patient care, which is incredibly exciting. And the idea that we can utilize our survivor care programs to be able to empower our patients to be able to access better care or to self-manage, make decisions away from the hospital, and be able to also advocate for themselves and you know, raising concerns. I think something that I came through really strong from Pepijn was the idea of repeatedly telling your story is exhausting and actually must be feel like you don't move forward from the sort of narrative that you risk becoming. You know, my name's X, I had leukemia, you know, but no, I mean, his life is and story is now moved from those things, and it's not the leukemia that defines him, and it must be very difficult to keep telling your story. So better care coordination and communication between health professional teams, I think we hear, makes a massive difference to patients. I think there also, I think I got from Hélène and also from Pepijn, you know, this importance of being able to share experience, and we get that as health professionals, particularly through the network that EBMT creates and the meeting. We are able to share our experience, ask questions of experts, and talk about our practices locally and how those practices might influence the wider field. But patients themselves don't necessarily get the same opportunities to network. And I think there's something there about, you know, being able to engage with other people who've had similar experiences to yourself in a way that feels safe. and those collaborations that we get as health professionals, being able to offer opportunities to patients to be able to collaborate together as well is really valuable. And then I think finally for me, this idea of survivor programs, which we do see in some countries, but maybe a possibility to explore how we might be able to create or signpost patients to those survivor programs that might already be happening in their own countries that they may not be aware of, or some of the health professionals involved in their care may not be aware of. So, maybe there's something that can be done there that's actually quite simple and straightforward, but would have real meaning. Hilda, what about yourself? I said a lot, I know, but
you exactly highlighted all those issues. I also was writing down as the main lessons for today. The guideline is really important, the implementation for that as well. It's not only the responsibility of the riders, it's also the responsibility of everyone. And that counts also for the lessons we learned from both Hélène and Pepijn today. We all have the responsibility to take this with us in our daily work. And it can be small, like asking for a goal for the day, like Pepijn told us, but also the coordination and continuity of care we have to arrange for these patients is really, really, really important. And that means also the survivorship and peer support care they wanted themselves so much. So I think, and that also brought me up to the idea that we daily can talk with our patients, and we can daily also ask, what can I learn from you today? And I think we don't do that so often. We always like it to listen to podcasts with or other talks with patients, but we can do that daily in our daily job. So maybe we can encourage each other to do so. But it was today's podcast had a lot of lessons with us, and we can learn a lot from that. So thank you for being the co-host for today.
Thank you so much, Hilda. Thank you so much to you as well. And I want to thank our guests, Hélène and Pepijn, the EBMT background team, and thank you all for listening. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you.